Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Marco Barker, and I serve as Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Inclusion and Associate Professor of Practice at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And my pronouns are he, him, and his. We want to welcome you to D&I Live at 5. And this particular topic is on finding your purpose. And so the Lava Five is really meant to be a living room conversation, if you will, and an opportunity to discuss how we think about diversity and cultural perspectives and how those perspectives certainly shape our life decisions and even shaping higher education. This particular topic on finding your purpose actually derived from an Instagram post of today's guest. And so I'm looking forward to having dialogue with Dr. McConnell-Black. A few technical items. So on the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a question and answer button. We invite you to submit questions throughout today's segment, and the questions will be monitored by our own Jerry Harner, Executive Assistant in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at UNL. Additionally, today's webinar is being closed captioned, and so for those who wish to use that option, again, at the bottom of your screen there is a button titled CC. You may select that to be able to actually see the closed captions of today's seminar. This notion of finding your purpose really came from a sense of being thoughtful and mindful about what's happening today. So we know that we are in the midst of a global pandemic, and sometimes it certainly is providing a shift in the way that we do our work, the way we learn, the way we interact. And so we are finding new and interesting ways to do that. It's also a time of uncertainty. We know that there are many things that are happening with people's work, for example, that individuals are finding themselves furloughed or out of work. In other cases, people are finding themselves as essential employees. So whether it's in the healthcare industry or safety or security or even service industry, they're having to be on the front lines. And so we certainly applaud them for their efforts and what they're doing. What we do know is that this causes a time for us to hopefully find an opportunity to stop and reflect. This topic was further inspired by Katrina Ruth's article, The 7 Steps to Living Your Life with Purpose. And so we'll talk a little bit about that a little later in today's segment. I have with me Dr. Karnell McConnell-Black. Karnell is joining our conversation. He's a dear friend and colleague who I had the chance to work with at Westminster College. And so I've come to adore and admire and certainly be inspired by Dr. McConnell-Black. And so I'll read a little bit about his formal, why I know him personally, a little bit about his formal background. So Karnell is the Vice President for Student Life and Dean of Students at Westminster College. He has over 11 years of experience in higher education. Westminster College is located in Salt Lake City, Utah. Karnell is a proud son of Dallas, Texas, from the South, and he earned his bachelor's degree in communications and his master's degree in higher education from Loyola University, Chicago. He has since recently defended his doctorate, and so we're so excited for him. And he earned that from the University of Utah in education leadership and policy. Karnell is super active. He's involved locally in Salt Lake City. He's certainly engaged in national and regional boards. Additionally, I would just say that Karnell is someone who I think is creative and innovative, caring, thoughtful. Certainly as a vice president of student affairs, he is student-centered, but I think what's most important is that Karnell is also people-centered. And so that's why I think it's so great to have him part of today's panel. And Karnell's pronouns are he, him, and his. So as you're thinking about your questions, you can use those pronouns or certainly refer to us both by name. As a reminder, you may again submit questions throughout today's segment using the question and answer button located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. With that said, I first want to say, Karnell, thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of today's conversation.
Thank you, Marco. I'm excited to talk a little bit with everybody and chat with you a little bit about finding passion. So I'm excited. I'm pumped.
Absolutely. I'll try not to during this segment to sort of turn this way as you're sitting next to me. I'm used to us.
I'm like, which way are you?
I know, being in the same office and being able to actually have conversations like this, but just so thrilled to have you here today. you know, we've been talking a bit about this, right? So you posted a video of yourself on Instagram just reflecting about what's happening right now. How do we move forward? How do we think about what the future holds? So for you, Karnell, when you think about finding purpose, what really resonates with you or really sticks out to you around that term, finding your own purpose?
I think for me, finding purpose, I mean, it starts actually with just even my own upbringing, really. But when I think about, finding purpose, um, it's centered for me at the crossroads of, again, as I said, my upbringing, but also the things that I'm just most passionate about, most excited about. And I think part of that is around people, helping people. I grew up in the inner city of Dallas, and it was definitely a challenging time, and I saw lots of um, folks that looked like me doing things that I don't think, well, would be the path that would be, the most successful. And so I was like, how can I help, change the trajectory for young Black men in our communities? And so for me, that was kind of what started this whole journey for me of what is finding my passion. Because I thought I was going to be an attorney and do the course and do law school, all that good
Yeah.
stuff. But I realized when I was in college, I was like, actually, there's another opportunity. There's a different way because I don't really want to be behind a desk all day long and want to, just feel like I'm doing all this research and not really making a true impact. And so for me, it was also about making an impact, particularly for marginalized students and even more so, more directly put, um, Black men, Black young men. And so, for me, again, that passion stems from me seeing that in my upbringing, but then also knowing that I could actually have an impact and help folks navigate what it meant to be in higher education. Because again, I was that person who failed their first semester of college. So I was like, maybe this isn't the right thing. And then I
Absolutely.
realized that maybe it was. And
We
I
all
was
have
like,
those
there were
stories.
people, to help me and to help guide me through some of these things. I was like, I can do that. I can do that. And we need it.
Yeah, absolutely. This ideal about purpose is really tricky, right? And I know we had a number of people submit questions, and hopefully we'll try to get to some of those questions that were pre-submitted. But this ideal about, as you were talking, what we are meant to do versus what we need to do, right? So understanding that sometimes, like, what we need to do is have a job and take care of ourselves, and there's sort of
Mm-hmm.
this pathway that's led forth, or we again have in our mind our future career. So everyone always asks, what do you want to be when you grow up? And so we have these notions about in our future career, there's a certain pathway that we have to find. It's interesting. Katrina Ruth talks about thinking about purpose as this sense of our calling, this sense of, she sort of refers to it, it gets super deep, but refers to it as our sole purpose, right? Like, so this ideal about this real desire, and you certainly spoke about that. When I think about our own upbringing, I know that we share some sort of overlap in some of the upbringing, right? So being Black men from the South, raised in a single parent household, certainly first generation. My father attended college, but my mother did not. And so this whole ideal about navigating a new space without having all the answers and knowing
Right,
exactly how all like,
right.
how all of that works. So when I think about Karnell McConnell-Black, right, first generation college student who's now senior administrator on the president's council, on the cabinet, being a part of making really senior level decisions for an institution. Um, I don't know. Did you know? So when did you go from attorney to this new pathway? How did like your
Oh,
path and then your purpose around wanting to give back? Like, where did it intersect or overlap? Did it collide? Did
you
it
know,
coalesce?
those are really good questions. And it's so funny because I never imagined that I would be at this place in my career. And I call it a career because, some people talk about jobs and some people talk about careers. And for me, career is connected to this idea around passion and vocation and calling. And I think for me, when I was in school, I went to Loyola University of Chicago.
Yeah.
It's a Jesuit Catholic institution. And one of the things that were really ingrained, even in the liberal arts of the education, there was like thinking about reflecting and what is purpose and finding passion and connecting with other folks and looking at humanity and all of that. And so I think for me, the beginning point was really college for me to really say, okay, here's the connection. Because I thought I still was going to be an attorney in college. Like that was the thing. I was like, I want to, there was this place of like, I want to help my family. I want to get them out of poverty. I want to make sure my mom is in a good place. And for me, being an attorney growing up was like, oh, it's equated with this sense of statue and status, but also like money at the end of the day, because you want to survive, not just want to survive, you want to like live comfortably.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, attorneys are good at that. And then at one point I was like, maybe I'm gonna be a doctor. And then I was
We
like,
all wanted to, right? Yes.
yeah, that's what I was like. I don't know, maybe that's what I want to do. And then I think again that was that point in college where I had one of the lowest points in my life, where I go back to high school. I was like, oh, I was top 10 in my class. I was student body president, and I got to college and I thought I knew the college thing. And then I had some moments of like, is this really the right thing? I worked at a law firm as well. And so I realized after one summer, after my first year of college, I went back and worked at this law firm that I had worked for while I was in high school.
Yeah.
And I was doing legal assistant stuff and I was doing all this research. And I was like, where are the people that I'm supposed to be helping? Because I don't feel like I'm helping anybody. This didn't feel right. It didn't feel
Yeah.
good. But then I was like, you know what? This whole idea around, part of me kind of in that moment threw away this dialogue or this inside voice around, okay, I have to make all this money in order to be successful. And so
Yeah.
I had to really reframe the way that I thought about my educational journey, but
Mhm.
then also the way that I was intersecting that educational journey with what I wanted to do and how I wanted to impact the world and even more so my community. And one of the things that is so funny that I always come back to is that to whom much is given, much is expected. And my advisor that I had, her name was Linda Lydia, and she was my NAACP advisor.
Yeah.
And every moment and every time I just continue to think about to whom much is given, much is expected. And so I've had all these opportunities throughout my career and even throughout college and things of that nature that there's a responsibility that I feel like I have to give back to my community because
Mm.
it's not just about me being successful, it's about the whole community being successful. And so that kind of resonated with this piece too for me around what is passion, what is vocation, what is calling.
Mm.
There is a responsibility, and I feel there's a responsibility for me, especially as a Black male, to be able to help other Black men be successful in whatever way that looks like.
Absolutely.
And everyone has a different path, everyone has a different journey. Higher education may not be the thing for them, but if I can provide some words of wisdom or some advice or guidance about how I approach things and navigated life, like that's to me that's good. That's a great place to be. Not just in the sense of like every person has to go to higher ed or every person has to go to college. That's not necessarily the piece because my brother didn't go to college. So
Yeah.
and I have a younger brother and an older brother, and I'm the only one that has gone to college. So and I said my brother is very successful still, and then so I even think through some of those experiences that I've had and say those are people's passions too. They're entrepreneurial
Absolutely.
in spirit. They are doing all these wonderful cool things and they're living and they're happy. I think that's the another important piece is that they're happy with what they're doing.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And as you were talking to Karnell, this notion about the purpose and the pathway, right? And we talk a lot about that your path could look very different than right other people's path. And there was one of the pre-submitted questions was sort of getting at what's the purpose of higher education and when
yeah,
is it important? And part of it is, once you identify what the purpose, like what your calling is, there could be a number of different pathways, right?
yeah,
Which it may or may not include higher education. I might think certainly as individuals who are employed by institutions of higher education, we certainly recognize the power and the opportunity that education provides. But going to whether it's a 2-year or 4-year institution may not be the path for you, right? And there's a
Right.
number of things that are driving that. I think back to, so like you were thinking attorney, right? I went to college to be an engineer, and I did engineering. Now you discovered your sort of crossroad a little early on, earlier than I did. I was an engineer, and I finished college and went right into an engineering job. It paid great. Sometimes our paths are also just driven by our own need for safety and security. And
Yes.
so sometimes paying the bill, like it's part of, like, I know that I want to be able to do this. And so we may not be in a position to be able to sort of take risk in a
Right.
way. And so people are often thinking about, I'm really passionate about this. Do I quit my job and go and
Yeah.
pursue my
Yeah.
passions? I don't know, maybe, right? I mean, I think it's
Right.
sort of, as you were mentioning, it sort of depends on your level of security and safety and where you are in your life and what makes the most sense and what's possible. And so sometimes we can be on paths, but I think, as you mentioned, Karnell, that it's really important that when we're on these pathways, if we are thoughtful and mindful about what the purpose is, we can
Mm-hmm.
still figure out that, okay, your pathway was communications. Like, I'm on the
Right.
communication pathway. While the purpose, right, has changed, you still began to see that this still path that I'm on around getting my degree in communications can still move me towards this other now purpose, right? And so I think as we move through this conversation, as people are watching, I hope you think about that paths and purpose can sometimes are different things. I mean, in the perfect world, they overlap really nicely. So yeah, I think you have something else to add,
Yeah,
Carnell?
I was going to say, also the piece around finding purpose isn't just the end destination. It's not like
Yes.
you find purpose and then it's it. And I think that's the other piece that I think is really important as we talk about finding purpose. Finding purpose is a journey. Like it will shift and change and move. And so being able to just be authentic with yourself to say, this is what in this moment and in this time, this is what purpose looks like for me. It may be different 2 to 3 years down the road. It may be different a month later because you're trying to figure out some other things and you don't exist in this vacuum. And
Yeah.
so you're engaging in the world in ways, you're connecting with your family and friends and colleagues and things of the nature, and these
Yeah.
big challenging issues in our world come up and you're like, I can do that, I can make an impact there. And I think that's another piece to add to this. It's like purpose isn't just a one-time thing. It's gonna shift and change. It's gonna swing, and I think that's okay, to be able to
Yeah.
say right now my purpose is this, and if it changes in a few years, that's okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, as a reminder to everyone, you are please feel free to ask questions using the question and answer application at the bottom. At this time, we're going to see if we have a question from those viewing. Jerry, do we have a question for us?
We do not have any submitted questions, but Dr. McConnell-Black, you did get a congratulations from Yelena.
I love moments of being able to celebrate
Yes.
ourselves. I
I mean,
love
hey,
it.
this is it. I'm gonna try to celebrate as much as I can. That's.
No, you
Thank you, thank you,
should.
thank you.
You should. So I'm gonna pull one of our maybe two of our pre-submitted questions that came a little earlier, and one of the questions is, so we've been talking about paths. So I think I'll ask this one about career trajectory, and what that looks like. So there was a question about what advice would you offer a recent graduate, considering that we're in the midst of COVID-19 and the impact that's having on higher education. We know we've heard of hiring freezes, that sort of thing. Interested in pursuing a career in either student affairs or diversity and inclusion. And so I'm going to toss it to my colleague, Karnell, first, because I would say, Karnell, that while you were in student affairs, I think you've been really intentional and thoughtful about how you infuse D&I, diversity and inclusion, and equity work and social justice in your work as a student affairs practitioner.
Right. And I think my advice, for folks is there's always going to be there's a foundation of things. And I've chatted with so many students who have graduated, whether they're undergraduate students wanting to go into the profession of higher education, whatever functional area, be it
Yep.
DEI or in particular student affairs functional areas, whether it's housing or orientation, whatever the case may be, even career advice in career centers and things of that nature. And so my biggest advice to folks is at some point you know what you're looking for, But in a time like this, the flexibility is really important too,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, if you have a really good solid foundation about what it is that you want to be doing and what you want to be accomplishing and the ways that you want to do that, I think that helps you kind of focus and narrow on some opportunities that probably will be more beneficial to you. So
Yeah.
when I think about this, I'm like, okay, if DEI is really important and essential to what you're doing, and yet you say you want to do orientation as your functional area, but there's no orientation functional jobs. But DEI is kind of like your DEI is your base. It's the base of what you want to be doing or what you want to be accomplishing. It's okay to say, okay, can I do DEI work in housing and in residence life? And really saying, okay, there's opportunities there, because I'm sure, that may be an area, given this climate, people are saying, okay, folks are going to be coming back to campuses soon. They're going to be living in the halls, and folks are going to want to, we're going to need professionals to do that work and provide support there. It's going to look very different. But at the base of it, you have this, foundation of DEI as your passion. And you leverage those skills in that work, especially when you think about creating equitable practices within housing or whatnot. So
Absolutely.
there's just, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be flexible. I think you have to be flexible and be willing to be flexible especially in times like this where some institutions are not hiring and there are people who are being laid off. And sometimes the first job is not always you shouldn't consider the first job the last job. Like, I mean, that's the reality, especially for folks who are my age, and I'm a millennial, by the way. So millennials have lots of jobs. It's just the nature of it. That's what research says. And so just know that this is not the end all. So you may say, oh, I've learned a lot of great things in that job, that first job, and it has definitely set me up for the next opportunity. And that's okay too. But knowing that things are going to be limited and you're going to have to be a little flexible, but
Absolutely.
you shouldn't compromise yourself as it relates to ethics, integrity, and some of the foundational things that are kind of your core. And I think understanding what your purpose is will help you select the appropriate opportunities without compromising that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think all that you said, I would completely echo. I would add again, going back to this path and purpose conversation, that sometimes, again, there are multiple paths to sort of live your purpose. And to Karnell's point, I think as there are opportunities, you can always be a student, right? So like you should always be learning, thinking about how do I get more information? How do I increase my expertise? So if you are really committed to DNI and you want a career in DNI and there's just not a lot of opportunities, you also have some skill sets that may be, whether it's housing or maybe it's business and finance. So I think depending on where you lead, right? Because again, going back to safety and security, I think we recognize that sometimes you need a job and
Yeah.
you have some skill sets that allow you to start on a path, but keeping your purpose in the back of your mind is also really important, so that, as Karnell was saying, as you are thinking about what job functions or what activities you engage in, you can be a bit more intentional and deliberate about connecting those back to your purpose. So that's really important.
That's right, Marco. I think the
Yeah.
intentionality piece is really important. Just have it, just not just saying I'm gonna just pick one thing and just do it, and like being strategic and very thoughtful and intentional about what it is that you're doing. And then when you're in those jobs too, to figure out ways that you can have collateral opportunities as well that really speak to your passions and speak to your purpose. There's another element too that I would include.
Absolutely. We'll take one more question. So there
We,
was,
Dr. Barker, we did have
yes,
some questions submitted live if you'd like to answer one of
sure.
those.
Let's take one. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Question from Holly. I really appreciate you offering the balance of finding your passion while also looking for a viable career. But how do we have that conversation without offending someone or presumably pigeonholing them?
You repeat it one more time for me.
How do you have the conversation about finding your passion while still looking for a viable career with someone without offending them or pigeonholing them?
So I guess I can maybe start, Karnell, and then as you're thinking about it. So this is a really great question, and I think that I'm going to tie back to what Karnell mentioned about having this core value, right? So these core values that are and things that are important to you, I think it's absolutely fine that when you are interviewing or having conversations about a role, to be able to ask a future employer how you might be able to incorporate some key things that are important to you, right? So if you are in a place where you have a skill set that maybe design is your skill set and you're going into a design role, ultimately you may want to be in student affairs or be in D&I more concretely. I think it's okay to go in and to be able to say, what's really important to me as I engage in design work is also looking at it through a D&I lens, or it's really important to me to be thinking about how this work connects with students. And so I think having these sort of value-based conversations is one way I think that you can frame these things that are part of, again, part of your passion, where you have some purpose, and to really talk through what that could look like in a potential career. But I don't know, Karnell, you have thoughts about that?
You know, maybe I'm going to take it from a different perspective a little bit, because I think, you know, if you are the advisor and you're having a conversation with other folks or other students or whatever the case may be, sometimes people may feel offended in some way because you're giving them some truth that sometimes is hard to digest. And so as you even have those conversations with folks, I think part of it is, I think going back to what Marco said too, is leading from those values conversations that you probably have with that individual, and then saying, okay, how do we loop back to that and tie back into that? Because I think that's going to be really important for them to really hear, saying, okay, like, let's try to suspend judgment about what something could be if we don't really know what it is yet. And then also to say, you know, I'm a realist at times. I'm practical in nature. So for me, I try to be just upfront and honest about the reality of situations that we're in. And so sometimes hearing that directly is probably helpful. And it may come, again, sometimes it may come across as feeling like, oh, I didn't really listen to the student the way I wanted to, or the individual the way that they wanted. Maybe they wanted to feel a different way about something. But I think it's really important to just be honest with the individual when you're having those conversations, to say, here's the reality. Like, and maybe they haven't had that reality check, and you're the person that's giving them that reality check. And I think they will value that much more. In the moment, maybe not so much, but down the road, hopefully they'll have an opportunity to reflect and say, oh, I see why you said that, or I see what that meant now. And even just prompting them to stop and reflect for a moment too, because I think that's another piece of when someone is, I want to say, people are in their feelings. When people are in their feelings about what advice you've given them or something like that, I would say take a moment to just say, take a moment to reflect about why for that person to say, why are you feeling that way? What's coming up for you? And to really dive into that. And it's not meant to be a counselor or a therapist or anything like that, but to really understand what's the concern, or what's the fear that's coming from that place, so that you can actually break through and provide the real advice that they want to hear.
Absolutely. So we want to share a little bit. So when you register, we did provide a link to the article from Katrina Ruth on the 7 steps to living your life with purpose. And so we want to bring up, for those who may not have had a chance to look over the article, there were 7 items that have been provided by Katrina Ruth on these steps, right? And so she talks a lot about, again, understanding what life should feel like, tap into your calling within, trust yourself, forget what others think, feel the fear and take the first step anyway, rethink your to-do list, check in with yourself daily, and then recognize that you have everything that you need. And so I'm curious, Karnell, again, we've talked briefly about these, but I'm curious of if there's one or a merger of, or more than one that really resonates with you.
I'm gonna say the first one is the third one, which is about trust yourself and forget what others think.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just tell you right now, I think I've always had these moments of like trusting myself and trusting my abilities, and second guessing myself. I think it constantly happens. I mean, sometimes it's also known as imposter syndrome. But also, I think one of the things that I've learned is, and I think I'm continuously developing in this area, but trusting yourself, I think, is really important in this because it goes back to kind of again, the foundation of your values, of why you're doing what you're doing, your purpose, that core.
Right.
And there are going to be people out there that don't want to see you be successful. There are going to be people out there that are going to put barriers and things in your way. And I think the biggest thing about, finding your purpose, this is your journey. Like, this is your journey. It's not someone else's journey. I tell you, everybody has an opinion about someone's journey. But their opinion doesn't matter because it's your journey. You're the one that's leaving. You're
Right.
leading that journey.
Absolutely.
You're walking it. You're getting it day in and day out. And so for at least for me, I'm always thinking about, okay, this is my path. I don't need to compare myself to other folks and figure out what other people think about me. I'm going to do the best that I can, that I know I can, and
Right.
contribute the best that I know, because that's what's important. Because at the end of the day, when you're done and when you go home to go to sleep, like, you want to know that you've done your best for that day. You've done your part. You've helped your community. You've contributed to something in some meaningful way for yourself. That is making an impact. And
Yeah.
I can tell you, whether it's one person that says thank you, or you get an email from a student or a colleague 2 or 3 years later about something that you did, those are the moments that really matter, to say, yes, I did what I did right. I did good. Like,
Yeah.
and own it. It's okay to own how good you are.
Yeah, I love that, and I think certainly all of these certainly resonate in so many different ways. I think for me, there were probably two that stand out. I'll try to talk to those quickly. But Katrina talks about, the number 5, rethink your to-do list. So again, I'm an engineer by training, folks. So I'm sorry that I still sort of have that mechanical way of thinking, and lists always help me. And so in that, Ruth says that decide what matters in advance, right? So it's this notion that somehow our purpose is going to rain down and be so neat and tidy, and it'll just happen in
Yeah.
that way. And so this sort of goes back to the intentionality that we both had talked about earlier, that I really do believe in. It's so important to just take time, and even during this time, like taking time and going, here are things that really matter to me. Like, these are the things I really want to accomplish. Like, these are the places that I want to have impact. And sometimes knowing that can be so powerful and help you. So again, I mean, I think, at least for me, I'm not sure for Karnell, but for me, when I went from engineer to now D&I practitioner, even as an engineer, even practicing engineering, like, I knew that D&I issues really mattered to me. How I got there was just some happenstance, some intentionality, but at least I knew exactly what mattered most for me in advance, so that as I made decisions, I could be really thoughtful about that. The last one, that number 7, I thought was really interesting, like recognizing that you have everything you need. So I think that's sort of variable, right? I mean, we all have different identities, and I think that the way in which we navigate the world is oftentimes based on our identities, is based on lived experiences. And so I think that when I interpret it as Ruth has it here, one could interpret it as, there are talents and skills that we have in us that can absolutely help catapult us to the next thing, right? And so we've all, maybe not all, but some of us have probably done some sort of self-assessment that's told us what our strengths are. And I think it's really important to really tap into that and not get lost into, I have to be a vice chancellor of diversity like this person practices being a vice chancellor, or I have to be a VP of student affairs the exact same way that this other VP manages. And so I think it's about identifying and really owning who you are and being able to use that. But I think also recognizing that sometimes there are things that we may not have everything we need. And so we may have to be thoughtful and mindful along our path, that there may be some things that we really need to pick up along the way to help us towards our purpose. And I think being able to, again, to find that ultimate calling is really important too. I want to make sure, for the sake of time, we're going to fast forward a little bit, Karnell, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
And again, just remind people that you can submit questions. And so, Jerry, do we have a question from the Q&A?
Yes, we do. Barbara says, thinking about how we individually seek to find slash acknowledge purpose in our professional and personal lives, can you share how community has played a role and informed your journey?
That's a really good question. If you don't mind me starting,
Yes, please.
because I was going to add to what you were sharing, Marco, about, you have everything that you need, recognize that you have everything you need. And I think part of that too is community. Like your community is a part of this journey. And I think for me, that definitely is what informed my purpose and why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it again starts with the conversation of seeing folks who are in gangs in my
Yeah,
neighborhood and knowing that there were other avenues or opportunities for them to navigate, but wasn't available to them. And so I go back to that sense of community because that's at the end of the day really important for me. And it's important that we think about our communities collectively. Like
yeah,
there's nothing in this world that we accomplish by ourselves. Like if you forget about community, then I mean that's really that's selfish essentially to me.
yeah,
And that's why I keep going back also to the motto of too much is given, much is expected, because community isn't in that. Community is
right.
it's about community. It's not just about self. And so recognizing that your community is important, and that community looks different for everybody.
Absolutely.
And it's not just again family, it's not just friends, but it's also people who you come into contact with at a conference or that you have an interaction with, on the street or you at the grocery store, whatever the case may be.
Yeah,
You get a chance to learn something from folks, and I think that's the beauty of being in this world together with folks is that we don't have to do anything alone. Like
right.
there are people out there
Absolutely.
that want to support you and want to help you be successful, no matter whether it's personal or professional. There are going to be people who want to be there to help you lift you up, and that's I think is really important as we think through this idea of like how community is connected to that. And 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 sometimes it's also I think I've also found that there are times when folks don't want to even use the community that they're there, they want to help, but
Yeah,
folks are like, no, I got this, I want to do it on my own. It's okay to ask for help, and it's okay because there's going to be people there that want to help, they want to provide that support. So when someone asks, wants to help you accomplish something, go for it.
absolutely. I completely ditto all of that. I think that's a really great response. And so we'll take one question that was pre-submitted. Let's take this one. So right now we have an awesome opportunity to prioritize our personal and professional development. How do you recommend we maintain this when we go back to campus? So I think I'm still trying to prioritize my professional development. Quite honestly, I'm really honest in that it's been really tough for me in terms of I think the physical distancing from work and life and professional development, personal development was probably a little easier when we were in the office. And so so I've not done a great job at keeping those and keeping that in mind. But I will say this: I think that, and this sort of goes back to Ruth's 7 point about not the seventh, but the 5th point about having a to-do list. So I'm always just thinking about what's the next thing for me to learn, and whether that is I want to pick up a foreign language and learn something new on my own, or it's in my profession, there's a new delivery or a new approach to D&I that I want to connect with a colleague and be able to do that. And so I think that, to the point of how you prioritize, I'm just a huge believer of being able to articulate it and note it and document it. And again, always have that list so that, again, what matters most, so that when there are opportunities, you can certainly remind yourself
Right.
that it's an opportunity that aligns with, again, those core values, those areas that I've said is really important for me to have some type of growth around. And I also would say it's really important having that conversation with supervisors too. And I'm a huge proponent. So The members of my team know that we always, I try to incorporate a section in our meetings that's around comments and concerns, and thus a space to be able to really talk through what's next. Certainly, we are having ongoing conversations about professional development. So I'm a personal proponent that trying to provide a pathway for people to be thoughtful about how they do want to develop. And I think it's important to have that conversation with supervisors so that you're able to articulate that these are areas that really matter to me professionally, and then just making time in your and then making time for yourself on those personal developmental aspects.
I'll just add shortly, it's so funny now that I don't have to study and write all the time. I think I've taken a little bit of a different perspective, and I'm like, I'm trying to focus on personal right now, and I'm like, okay, can I get my run-ins now? What can I do to get back to some balance? And so for me, it's more for me the next I'd say few months will be around finding that balance again around the personal pieces and personal health and well-being, because again, going through a doctorate program is not easy. It's definitely challenging. It's time consuming. You forget, sometimes you have to let your friends go to the wayside, and your husband. For me, my husband going to the wayside for a little bit. I had to acknowledge that he was in this with me. But so it's important to know that, like, for me, relationships are really important for the personal. And so I want to make time for those relationships, and it is a commitment to say I need to build in that time. Like, I need to make sure, just like I did it for a degree, I need to build in this time now to rebuild the relationships that I have neglected over the past few years.
Yeah, absolutely. So then we may have time for one more question. Jerry, is there another question in the Q&A?
Yes, we have a question. Congratulations, Dr. McConnell-Black. A question: how do you remain committed to advancing Black men specifically while not making others who may not be Black men feel slighted or left out?
So here's my philosophy around this. When I think about the most marginalized individuals, whether they're on our campuses or in our communities, my sense of things is, again, this is me going back to some of the critical race theory discussions and dialogues and literature and learning that I've done, and so for me, it's like I think about that work and whatever policies or things that come up that are impacting, in particular, Black men. At the end of the day, I think whatever decisions I'm making or deciding or programs or things that I'm putting in place is actually going to be uplifting everybody. So it's not that it's just going to only impact Black men. There's going to be some times where that impact actually happens for everybody. And I think even on my own campus right now, I serve as a mentor for our first generation students, and I have 3 Black males that I mentor. And so I think it's for me, it's also being intentional about the personal pieces. For me, that it's I have a personal reason why I want to why I want to help Black men in particular. But it doesn't mean that I don't care about everybody else. But there are some pieces around my own identities that I think I want to make sure that I am supporting and providing support to Black men, to know that I want them to say, oh, I can accomplish that. Because again, they may not have seen that. They may not have had that opportunity as other folks, or their life experiences are going to be very different, depending on their circumstances. So I think for me, at the end of the day, one, from a personal standpoint, that's that part where you go back to, like, you trusting yourself and saying, okay, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, and saying I want to do this because this is a foundation of who I am and what I want to do. And then the other piece of it is, from a professional standpoint, is like the things that I'm doing is actually going to be uplifting everybody. So yes, it may start off with having these dialogues and conversations around, Black men, but guess what? That's going to uplift everybody at the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you, Karnell. So I know we are at time, and Karnell and I could probably talk even another hour, 2 hours about a lot of these topics. There's a few things that I wanted to at least bring to your attention. There's this concept. So the book, The Soul of Leadership by Deepak Chopra is a really great resource, but I want to read this excerpt that I think is really powerful as we're thinking about sort of, again, purpose and your passion and what's next. And Chopra talks about this ideal about having really heightened awareness, right? So the author says that I believe the soul is an expression of an underlying universal field of consciousness.
Mm.
Your particular awareness or soul is like a wave in this boundless sea, unique for a brief moment in time before it falls back into the larger entity from which it emerged. At the soul level, you are seamlessly connected with everything in the universe to the silent domain from which all matter and energy spring. And so I think it reminds us about just how much we're connected to so many things and that we're interconnected. And so there's so many different opportunities and I believe endless pathways to really help us live our full purpose. And so I want to thank Karnell for being our guest for DNI Live at 5, and thank all of you for being part of the segment. A few housekeeping things. So we are placing a link in the feedback, in the chat section at this moment, and we're hoping that everyone will take about a minute to copy and paste that link into your browser, and so that we're asking registrants to please complete the feedback survey and provide us with some really great feedback, I hope great feedback around the future of DNI Live at 5. 10 randomly selected students who complete the feedback form will receive a free copy of Chopra's book, The Soul of Leadership. Once you complete your feedback form, you will receive a confirmation with the code that will ask for you to send that code back in to have your opportunity to be part of the drawing. And so, Karnell, thank you so much. This was
Of
really
course,
great.
it was
Always
great.
great seeing you.
Great.
And again, thank you all for joining again, DNI Lab at 5. At this time, we're going to provide ways to contact us with additional comments or questions. We know that you had so many questions for us, and we hate that we could not get to all of them, but in the spirit of purpose and pathways, we are certainly both committed to helping others think about their own pathways and purpose. And so you can certainly please note our contact information there. And so we hope that you certainly enjoy your evening, and thank you for tuning in at DNI Live at 5.